Hello, everyone. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and with Rivals of Ixalan releasing soon, we got some super special videos. So today, we're going to be talking about the top 10 Rivals of Ixalan cards for Modern with a super special guest. So today we have with us Richard. How's it going today, Richard?
Hey Seth, what's going on?
Not much. Excited to talk about Rivals of Ixalan as far as Modern is concerned. So, before we get into the individual cards, what is your perception of Rivals of Ixalan, just in general for Modern? Good Modern set, bad Modern set, horrible, in the middle? What do you think?
I don't know about good, but impactful. I think there are some cards on this list that we will see in Modern, and I think we'll see Modern changed a little bit because of it. I don't know to the extent of Fatal Push. Fatal Push really shook up Modern. But I think this is one of the better sets for actually having an impact in older formats. There are a bunch of cards here that I do expect to see in Modern in the coming months.
Yeah, I think there's not one card to me that sticks out, like you said, like Fatal Push, where you're like, oh my goodness, that changes everything. But there's a wide variety of cards that feels like might do something and could actually end up being even better than we think. So I'm definitely excited for it. I think it'll be interesting. Kind of benefits from the fact that Merfolk is already a tribe, Vampires is already like a fringe tribe. So giving those tribes more support is an easy way to have cards that show up in Modern because you already have the foundation there. But I'm super excited to talk about it. So today we have a top 10 countdown along with some honorable mentions that we're going to talk about briefly. So let's jump into our list, starting with the honorable mentions. So first off, Richard, we have Storm the Vault, which flips around into Vault of Catlacan, World Shaper, and Mastermind's Acquisition. So what are your thoughts on any of these cards?
So these are cards that are insanely powerful, but we don't know what we're going to do with them. So Vault of Catlacan is Tolarian Academy. Making mana for each artifact you control is absurd. You know, in the right deck, you can make tons and tons of mana. Why you would do this, how you would use this, I have no idea. Because you actually need to flip Storm the Vault. It starts off in Izzet colors. You need 5 or more artifacts. So something like Affinity can flip quite easily, but why do you have a 4-mana spell in Affinity, and what are you going to do with all this mana? Who knows? Same with Lantern Control. If you have this many artifacts on the field, do you need to generate all this mana? I have no idea. So it's on the list because it can do broken things. My immediate mind goes to Mindslaver, right? That's one thing you can do with a ton of mana is Mindslaver lock someone. But what you would do with this, I have no idea. It just seems very strong, and there's got to be a use somewhere.
Yeah, I think that another possibility is like an egg-style combo deck that can definitely use all the mana. You get a lot of these useless artifacts on the battlefield. So whether or not it actually finds a home remains to be seen. The fact that you can't just play it and immediately tap it for 5 mana or something is definitely a drawback. It's like a Tolarian Academy would suspend 1 if you're playing enough artifacts, but still, Tolarian Academy is insanely powerful. Probably the most powerful land maybe ever printed in Magic's history. So seeing something that looks like Tolarian Academy, definitely worth taking note of. As far as World Shaper, I like that it's kind of a redundant, splendid reclamation. So it gives the deck more ways to do that. Or do you see something more? Is this just like a splendid reclamation that you have to sack, or is there something else going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically that. It's kind of like Sacred Tribe Elder. It can, it can save you a couple points of damage while you set this up. But you're not playing this for any fair reason. You're playing this because you have a reason to put all your lands from the graveyard back on the battlefield. Valakut style decks, maybe big ramp decks, but you're basically going to cheat and do a mega ramp spell. And again, it's in our honorable mention because we have no idea why or how you would use this, but it's so powerful that it should find a home somewhere one day, if not immediately. I don't know. Just putting all lands back from your graveyard is a great deal, especially in Modern when you have fetches and stuff that just naturally go there.
And then Mastermind's Acquisition, we actually have a wish in Modern. I guess we had Glimmering Wish before, but this is a wish with no restrictions. Grab any card you want from your sideboard. So do you have a specific plan for this one, or is this more just like, this is a pretty good deal, someone's got to be able to figure out something to do with it?
Yeah, of all the cards here, I like Mastermind's Acquisition the best. Wishes have been very powerful in combo type decks. It allows you to put your finisher outside of your deck, so that you can avoid Thought Seizes, surgical extraction type effects, or choose the right finisher. Do you want Grape Shot? Do you want Empty the Warrens? But more importantly, you wish in your anti-sideboard card. So, for example, if they play a ley line, you can go grab something to deal with that ley line. So I like this, and it also just acts as a tutor. So I'm expecting to see this in combo decks, storm-type decks, possibly. Weird thing is it is black. That's not a storm color right now. But I expect this to be used somewhere. Having a wish in Modern seems insane, and it's also just a diabolic tutor, which isn't even that bad. So I'm very surprised they printed this. I don't know why they printed this, but I'm glad it's here. It's got to open up avenues for something.
Well, let's move on to our second page of honorable mentions, and here we have one spoiler card from us, the MTG Goldfish, Induced Amnesia, along with a couple of vampires. So, Richard, Induced Amnesia, what are you doing with this one in Modern?
Yeah, we've talked about this at length because it's our spoiler card. It's a way to draw a lot of cards if you can sacrifice it, and that's usually for combo purposes. But I don't know what the home for it is now. It just seems like it's one of those cards that will lay dormant for a while until the perfect piece is printed, and then suddenly it's a broken combo, and everyone's like, why didn't I think about this before? That's Induced Amnesia, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I agree. I don't know if it'll make an immediate impact, but it seems like one of those cards that'll sneak up out of nowhere and suddenly break something. So, as far as Dustleason Zealot and Legion's Lieutenant, are these just Vampire Tribal cards, like making Vampire Tribal a thing?
Yeah, Legion Lieutenant is definitely a tribal card. Dusk Legion Zealot is just a value card. Cards, 2-mana 1/1s that draw you a card are insanely good. Think Satyr Wayfinder, Elvish Visionary. Those cards are played in decks that don't care about the creature type. And if you have the right creature type, it's a bonus. So a lot of people probably have this under the radar. I think this is probably one of the most powerful cards in the set for both Standard and Modern, if Vampires is a thing. Just a 2-mana 1/1 that cycles is very playable, and it's a vampire, so if you have Legion Lieutenant out, it's a 2/2. It does more things. So maybe this is enough to make Vampires a real deck in Modern.
Yeah, I think it goes a long way. Vampires didn't have a straight-up 2-mana Lord. I've tried to play Vampire Tribal before, so having a 2-mana Lord is a big deal, and having Elvish Visionary is also a huge deal. Elvish Visionary is a staple in Elf decks. Just getting an on-tribe creature on the battlefield and that doesn't cost you a card is really, really powerful. Plus, Legion's Lieutenant, being black-white, works with some other Vampire synergies, like Vampire Nocturnus, that cares about black cards. So I'm definitely interested to see if Vampires actually has enough to probably not be a tier 1 deck, but maybe be like a legit tier 2 deck in Modern now, thanks to all this tribal support. Let's move on, and this is my big addition to the list. I really like this card. Wayward Swordtooth. So, giving you a 3-drop with a big body that doesn't actually do anything for a while until you get a send, but lets you play extra lands each turn. So, Richard, any thoughts on this one?
It's a strange card. It's a 5/5 that can't attack or block until you have the City's Blessing. So you need 10 or more permanents, but in the meantime, you can play 2 lands at a time. So the additional lands helps you get the City's Blessing, but I don't see the point of this. 3-mana 5/5 barely beats out a Goyf. It's a lot of work. We have a lot of cards that kind of give you the extra lands today, like Explore, and then for creature-based decks we have Oracle and Azusa. So I'm not really sure. Where do you see the potential in this, Seth?
Okay, so there's 2 things that I think give this card potential. First off is, in the world of budget deck building, Azusa's like $50, and this is probably going to be $5 or less, maybe way less. So if you're looking for just like a fill-in Azusa that isn't as good, this is a good option. But where I really like this card is Todd Stevens has been championing this green-white value town deck, where the main synergy is you collected company out Azusa or something similar along with Ramanamp Excavator, and that lets you make multiple land drops from your graveyard each turn, which means you're getting fetch lands to thin out your deck, then you're getting Ghost Quarters to kind of strip mine your opponent out of the game, while you're also just playing this other value-y kind of hate-berry type stuff. And I think in that build in specific, Wayward Sworotooth might just be better than Azusa. You give up a land drop, but that deck spews permanents on the battlefield with Collected Company and Noble Hierarchs and stuff. So I think it'll become a creature eventually, and it gives you a lot of the same synergies you get with the Azusa in that plan. I think if you're comboing off with like the old Amulet Bloom decks, you really need to have Azusa. The 2 land drop things matter. But in this, I think since you can hit it with Collected Company, and it works well with Ramanamp Excavator, and gives you a much more resilient body than Azusa, not dying to lightning bolts, etc. I think that maybe there's an argument this is just better Azusa in the Green-White Company Value Town shell. Well, let's move on. We have some graveyard hate, sort of. This is one of the most unique graveyard hate spells we've ever seen. Silent Gravestone. So, Richard, I want to hear your thoughts on this one, because my initial thoughts, I don't think, are what the deck is. I think this looks like a graveyard hate spell, but it actually isn't really a graveyard hate spell.
Yeah, it's like a graveyard protection spell that turns into graveyard hate. So I imagine, let's say, Living End could play something like this, where you can't target spells in their graveyard and they can stock up, and then if for some reason they need graveyard hate, they can use it. It can be used as actual hate, for example, against Snapcaster decks. So they can't use their Snapcaster Mage to cast spells. Maybe it's used in, say, Jund, where you want to shut down Snapcaster, but you don't want to exile your graveyard because it's going to shrink your Tarmogoyf. So there's all kinds of weird use cases for not targeting spells or abilities. Of course, if you actually need graveyard hate, this is a bit suspicious. For example, Relic still nukes everything, either abilities. It's like very narrow. So, you know, if you're playing a Delve deck or something, right, this kind of gives you graveyard hate but maintains your graveyard at the same time. It's just a really strange card, and there are pros and cons for using it in various decks.
Yeah, I think at 4 mana to activate, it's a tough sell in Modern as a graveyard hate spell, because if you're playing against like Dredge or Living End, there's a pretty reasonable chance that even if you have this on turn 1, the damage has already been done. They already have a board full of prized amalgams. They already cast a Living End and got back a bunch of creatures by the time you get 4 mana to activate it. But I really like the possibility of this card being protection for your Dredge deck. Your opponent can't surgical extract your prized amalgams. You can play this, like you said, Living End. So I almost see this as a really weird way to protect your own graveyard, like you were talking about. So I think that's the main purpose. If you want to exile graveyards, you're probably better off using Relic, or even Tormod's Crypt is probably better at just nuking the graveyard. But if you're a graveyard deck that wants to protect your stuff and maybe eventually sometimes use it on as a graveyard hate spell, that's where I think Silent Gravestone enters the conversation. If you're playing Dredge, playing Living End decks like that. Let's move on. So we got an uncommon dinosaur in Thrashing Brontodon. So Richard, what are you doing with the Brontodon in Modern?
I think it's pretty good. I was actually surprised this is a standard card. It's a 3-mana 3/4 dinosaur, and you can pay a mana to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Now that seems, meh. I mean, it's good, but is it good enough for Modern? But you can Collected Company it, you can Court of Calling it. It is a 3-mana 3/4 beater, so I think Mono Green Stompy would be interested in something like this, or adding it to Collected Company decks. Just as a way to hate on artifacts and enchantments on a beefier body.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because kind of the go-to card right now is Reclamation Sage, which Reclamation Sage does not have much of a body. It's a 2/1, this is a 3/4, this is a much better beater. The upside of Rec Sage is it's an enter the battlefield trigger, so if you spend all your mana to Collected Company, you get it, you kill something right away. So it'll be interesting to see if Thrashing Brontodon can actually take over some of the Reclamation Sage slots in people's sideboards, just because the body it's real. If you Noble Hierarch on turn 1 and play this on turn 2, that's actually like a pretty reasonable threat that's going to get in a lot of damage, even if you were put in the position where you got to kind of leave up mana sometimes if you're really concerned about blowing up an artifact or enchantment. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out, but I think there's a chance that it ends up being better Rex Age, at least in some builds. Let's move on. We have the White Wrath, or Pseudo Wrath. Only 3 mana though, Slaughter the Strong. So Richard, what are you slaughtering in Modern?
A lot of things get hit by this. So Death Shadow, chances are it'll die. Eldrazi, just big beaters in general. Even Tarmogoyf can get hit by this. Or even just the value. Say your opponent has 2, 4, 5 Tarmogoyfs, well, this kills one of them. So I expect this to be played in maybe hate bear decks with a lot of small creatures, maybe token type decks, as a way to kind of non-symmetrically sweep the board. It is a 3 mana Wrath, which is a very interesting number of mana for a Wrath, so I think someone will try it. And my favorite home is kind of a Death and Taxes type build, or a White Weenie type build. And just getting multiple Eldrazi or getting multiple Death Shadows seems to be the dream here.
Yeah, I think if you're playing a control deck, you probably want a Hard Wrath, because I think you really want to be able to take advantage of the creatures you have left over. So I picture Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarchs, those type of decks, since you get to keep them for free since they have 0 power, and then you can keep around your Leonin Arbiter, or your Thalias, or other good cards like that. So I feel like those are the decks that didn't really have a Wrath before. Like, it's kind of counterintuitive to play a Wrath in your creature-heavy green-white hate bear deck, but Slaughter the Strong might actually be in that conversation. It gets in under Gaddock Teague's restrictions. It's cheap enough that you can cast it with a Thalia on the battlefield. So if for some reason your green-white creature deck is in the market for a Wrath, this seems like a good option. Plus, against like Death Shadow, it pretty much just blows up every creature in that deck for 3 mana, which is also pretty relevant, I think. So I think there's a chance that this ends up being a pretty interesting sideboard card for decks that aren't used to having a Wrath at their disposal. We have Journey to Eternity, some reanimation in land form if we can flip it around. So what do you think about this one, Richard?
Flip cards have been very strong. We've seen Search for Azcanta show up in Modern. Journey to Eternity has potential. A lot of creatures have good enter the battlefield triggers. Now you get to double up on them, if not triple or quadruple. So the first Journey to Eternity gets your creature back when it dies. So think maybe like Sakura Tribe Elder, stuff like that. Or I guess even stuff like Thought Not Seer stuff is not bad. Or just value creatures. Put it on your Goyf, make it hard to destroy. But when this card flips around, for 5 mana, you get to straight up reanimate anything. So if you're still alive and in good shape, you'll probably win the game at this point, getting unlimited creatures from your graveyard. So I think this is strong. Whether it goes into a combo-y deck with like Sakura Tribe Elders, or it just goes into kind of Jund type decks like Blackweed Midrange, Abzan. Imagine getting Siege Rhinos. You know, like, oh, kill my Siege Rhino, drain you again. Oh, reanimate it, drain you again. We have 34 Rhinos on one card, right? So I'm excited to see where that goes. This also just gives you a mana, too. We can never forget that these lands just straight up ramp you, right? So if this comes in and flips, it's like a bad rampant growth. So I like that, even if you don't count the abilities.
Yeah, I think the part that makes me most excited is it seems really insane with Sakura Tribe Elder. I don't even know if you got to be a combo deck, but if you just Elder on turn 2 into this on turn 3, you're kind of ramping 2 lands, which is going to put you up to like 4 or 5 mana the next turn. Plus you're getting back the Sakura Tribe Elder, so that's another land there, and then you're just to like Grave Titans and huge 6 mana stuff. So I think there's some interesting. This sounds like a weird comparison, but like modern Nick Fit, like it is what I imagine building with this, where you're getting the weird double ramp off your early game creatures, and then once you flip it around, this gives you basically a lot of inevitability. Your opponent kills your stuff, you just keep getting it back, grinding your opponent out of the game. So I hadn't really thought about this card as being modern playable until you mention it, but the more I think about it, the more I'm actually really excited to try it out, because it seems like it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, I really like that curve, by the way. Sakura Tribe Elder, turn 3, Journey to Eternity. You chump block, so you get 1 land off Sakura Tribe Elder. Sakura Tribe Elder comes back, you get a second land. Your land flips, you have 3 lands now. And the next turn, which is turn 4, you either Titan Or if you have nothing to do, bring your Sacred Tribe Elder back for another chump block, right? So, not only a chump block, but a chump block and land. So you can keep doing this until you get to Emrakul mana or something. So, yeah, I really like that interaction.
Well, let's move on. So we have a 2-drop pirate, basically the red version of Snapcaster Mage, I guess, reverse Snapcaster Mage, Dire Fleet Daredevil. So, Richard, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, it's Snapcaster Mage with first strike, no flash, and it's your opponent's graveyard. I can see this being very strong in certain matchups, but terrible in others. It reminds me of Abbott of Carol Keep. When it first came out, everyone's like, it's kind of bad. And then for a while, everyone was on the Abbott plan in Jund. Now we're at Dire Fleet Daredevil. The problem is your opponent may not have good instants or sorceries. If your opponent is, say, Affinity and you're Jund, this is useless. But if your opponent is playing blue-white control, or if your opponent is also playing Jund, Dire Fleet Daredevil getting a Terminate to remove the Tarmogoyf is really good. So I think it might be a sideboard card. I don't know that it's main deckable, but it has enough potential. Abbott saw a bit of play in Jund decks for a while, and Dire Fleet Daredevil may play the same role.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know where Dire Fleet Daredevil fits, but a high percentage of decks in Modern are playing some sort of cheap instant or sorcery. Like, there's very few decks that are playing stone nothing, so even if you're getting back a Thoughtseize on turn 3, flashing back a Fatal Push to kill your opponent's thing on turn 3, or if the game goes long, you can get back more expensive stuff. So I think there's potential there, but I think the fact that it's matchup dependent to some extent, and there will be bad matchups where it does nothing, might keep it from being a main deck card. Obviously, if somehow Pirates actually make it in Modern, that would change things. I don't know if that's really a possibility, but there's definitely a lot of value packed into a pretty cheap body, which is worth taking note of at the very least, even if it doesn't have an obvious main deck home right off the bat. Well, let's move on. We have a parade of Merfolk. So, Richard, Deeper Delete, Merfolk Mistbinder, Jungleborn Pioneer, and Kumana Tyrant of Orska. So, what do you think about these? Is this just going to revolutionize green-blue Merfolk? Are all these cards showing up in that deck? Is it much better than it was before? Give me your take.
I think green-blue Merfolk is the new Merfolk deck, and of these cards, I am most excited for Kumana and Jungleborn Pioneer. Jungleborn Pioneer in specific because it just looks so bad. Right? If you look at it, you're like, huh? But Dwayne Elite is like the best card in Elves. And here we are, we're 1 mana up, but we have 1 more power. But your Merfolk has Hexproof, which can prove to be annoying. But if you have a Lord out, this is 3 mana for 5 power. If you have 2 Lords out, it's 3 mana for 7 power. And remember, the Merfolk is hexproof. So if it has Island Walk, your opponent has islands, you can just go to town. It's hard to deal with. So I actually think Jungleborn Pioneer is one of the secret underrated cards for Merfolk here. Giving Merfolk a Dwynen's Elite, I think, puts it over the top. It is a little awkward. It's 3 mana. It brings the curve up. And then the other good card, I think, is Kumana, Tyrant of Orazca. It's a 2/4. You can make it unblockable. You can tap 3 Merfolk to draw a card. Or you can tap 5 mana and basically Gavany Township yourself. I think it makes Merfolk into a grindy deck. Gets your creatures out of control. I think the best use case is against, for example, a Ensnaring Bridge deck. They put Ensnaring Bridge down, you can't attack them anymore, you're stalled out, what do? Well, every turn you just draw a bunch of cards with your Merfolk until you get the anti-Ensnaring Bridge card, and in the meantime, you've grown your Merfolk into like 2020s or something by putting Gavany Township counters on everything. So I think Kumana gives the deck a lot of late game and inevitability, so I really like that card as well. So I think these cards, I don't know about the other two, they're good cards. You're going to have to cut something to fit them in the deck, but I think just a lot of these good green cards will push Merfolk into the Simic colors in Modern.
That's really interesting because Merfolk has been mono blue for a long time, but I think you might be right. We've seen people already experimenting with green Merfolk decks since Ixalan came out, and blue green got a lot more power going forward. It's really interesting that Kumina solves some issues like you were talking about. It gives Merfolk an ability to kind of go long, this kind of more expensive Crypt Breaker type card where your hand's full after you get Wrath, which is one of the ways you lose with Merfolk, because you just dump out your hand, your opponent Supreme Verdicts, and you can't win. Being able to draw some extra cards helps avoid that. If you're in green, both cards that you mentioned, the Jungleborn Pioneer and Kumina, are under 4 mana, so you get to Collected Company for them if that's where your Merfolk deck wants to be. So I definitely think that out of all the tribes, Merfolk is the one that probably benefited the most from Modern. Vampires in the conversation, but Vampires were so far down the list in terms of playability that they need a lot more than Merfolk to be good. Merfolk was already a solid Tier 2, Tier 3 deck, and now getting these pieces might push it back up towards being Tier 1 again, where it hasn't been for a little while. So it'd be very interesting to see people testing Modern Merfolk and what the final shape of the deck is with all these powerful options. Not excited about Deep Brutally. I think that card is kind of a stretch. It seems a little bit slow. Mistbinder, maybe, although it's fighting with the Island Walk Lords and probably just worse unless somehow you want even more Lords. Maybe you're going down some of the other 3 mana stuff and just playing even more 2 mana Lords and just being 2 mana Lord tribal. So we'll have to see, but it's definitely an exciting time for Modern Merfolk with so many new additions.
Yeah, never have I wanted Snapcaster Mage to be a Merfolk. End of turn, Collected Company, put 2 Jungleborn Pioneers into play. That's 6 power, untap, Snapcaster, Collected Company, get 2 Lords, hit for 16 damage right there. Why is the Wizard not a Merfolk?
Well, let's move on to number 2 on our list. We have Warkite Marauder, another pirate. And this one is evasive. It's interesting. I'm curious to know what your thoughts on this one are, Richard.
Yeah, it's not a pirate, it's actually a human, which is what makes it important. With all the 5C, 4C human rage, this is a 2 to cast, 2/1 flyer that basically nullifies a blocker, which I think is the kind of card you want in an aggressive humans list. So I expect this to be played in the humans list, and I expect the humans list to get even better. And the human deck is bound to get better with every set, because every set has humans in it, and here's the card from Rivals of Ixalan to kind of push it further into Tier 1 status.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like because it's a human, I wasn't even thinking about the human aspect of it with Ixalan being so focused on pirates, but that's a really good call. It does make sense as a potential 2-drop in that deck. What's the Orzhov card that when it enters, you get to give all your opponent's stuff -1, -1, or your stuff +1/+1?
Oh, Pontiff?
Yeah, Orzhov Pontiff. You can do some sweet tricks. Pontiff is already kind of a sideboard card for humans, but you can take a Tarmogoyf for something huge and attack with Marauder and make it into a 0/1, and then Pontiff post-combat to wipe it out. So I think there's some neat tricks. Or is it Staticaster? Another good human sideboard card. Repeatedly attack and just shoot down all your opponent's stuff. So there's some cool tricks you can do in the human deck with Warkite Marauder.
Yeah, and a 2 to cast 2/1 flyer is not bad at all.
No, it's another evasive clock to just keep getting in damage. So, yeah, it sounds like it has potential. Well, let's move on. Number 1, top card on our list. Of course, if it looks like Blood Moon, it must be a modern staple. We're talking Blood Sun. So, not Blood Moon, but does some interesting stuff. So, I think you're a little higher on this than I am, Richard, as a hate card. So, why don't you explain what Blood Sun does in modern?
Alright, I think this is going to change Modern. Not to the point of Fatal Push, but I think people will have to change their deck choices and mana-based configuration because this card exists. So at first glance, it's not Blood Moon. It doesn't completely break all your mana, right? But it is a 3-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So even at its worst, even if it's terrible, you get to cycle it. It cantrips itself. Right, and all lands lose all abilities except mana abilities. So there's 2 ways to use this. One, as unfair ramp. Basically, all your bounce lands, the lands that tap for 2 mana and cause you to return a land from the battlefield, basically have no downside. The rules state that they still produce 2 mana, but you don't have to bounce anything. We've kind of seen this before with Amulet Bloom. Well, here you go, right? What can you do with broken mana? But that's one deck. What I'm more excited for is the fact that it breaks fetch land mana bases. So with Blood Moon out, if you're not playing red, your fetch lands still produce colorless mana, or red mana if you're playing red. With this out, your fetch lands produce nothing. So if your opponent plays this on turn 3 on the play, you're kind of stuck at 2 mana if all of your lands are fetch lands, which a large percentage of modern mana bases are. You need to remove this to actually unlock all of your lands. So imagine a control deck being stuck on 2 mana, right? How can they dig to get rid of this? Or a Jund deck stuck on 2 mana. The final nail in the coffin is that this doesn't affect Tron at all. So red-green Tron can play this and happily turn off, Search Forest Cantas, Tech Edges, Ghost Corners, without costing them anything, really. It actually replaces itself, so they can cycle through, continue drawing their Tron pieces, assemble Tron, while you're struggling to generate any mana whatsoever. So somehow, Wizards has made Blood Moon work for Tron in Blood Sun. So that's where I'm most scared. I am terrified of Tron decks playing this Blood Sun type effect and turning off all my fetches and ruining my very expensive modern mana base. Basically all unusable while Blood Sun is out.
Yeah, I think it is very scary in decks like Tron that use it to protect their own stuff, which sounds so counterintuitive for a deck like Tron to want a card that is somewhat similar to Blood Moon, but I feel like that's the best use of that card. It's also possible we see some crazy combo deck having bounce lands be untapped 2 mana soul lands is potentially powerful. You can do some crazy things with that. So I don't know. Personally, I'm not as excited about it as a lock piece. I get it feels like Blood Moon, why I love Blood Moon so much, is a lot of modern decks have like 3 basic lands, 4 basic lands. So Blood Moon makes it so your opponent only has a handful of lands that produce the color of mana that they want. On the other hand, with Blood Sun, a deck might have 10 fetch lands, 8 fetch lands. So instead of hitting on like 75% of your opponent's mana base or 85%, you're hitting on, I don't know, maybe at the maximum 50%, 40 something percent. There is an upside though, because as you mentioned, it makes it so fetches do literal nothing. They're not tapping for red mana, which means it's going to be even harder, and there will be situations, it seems like against Death Shadow, that's a very fetch land heavy deck because of how their deck is built. This might even just be better than Blood Moon because of how punishing it is to the fetch land. So I'll definitely be interested to try it out. At first glance, I didn't like it as a hate piece, but the more I talk about it, the more maybe hitting on fetch lands is good enough. So, I don't know. I wasn't as hyped about it at first, but the more I think about it, maybe just shutting down fetch lands is good enough, especially if it does something for your deck, like preventing Ghost Quarters from wrecking your Tron land. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our top 10 modern cards from Rivals of Ixalan. So, Richard, any final thoughts about anything on the way out the door today?
I'm ready for Blood Sun fueled meta. I'm ready for people being very sad with fetch lands, and so I think Blood Sun is will be the most played card, and I think Blue Green Merfolk is the most exciting new deck that we know of. And some of our honorable mentions and some of the other cards in the top 10, I wouldn't be surprised if they spawned just brand new archetypes. So I think Rivals has been an exceptionally good set for Modern. Not Fatal Push level, but a lot of cards. Because I know there are a lot of sets where we're really struggling and every card we list is a sideboard card. I think with Rivals, we have a lot of solid cards that have potential in Modern.
And I think it's even more important that this set is happening right now because we have a Modern Pro Tour coming up in like 3 weeks. So if there was ever a time to print Blood Suns and maybe make Merfolk into a new archetype, make vampires in the conversation, all these crazy wishes and stuff, this is the time to do it because we're going to get to see what the pros can do with all these cards in a short time. So I'm super excited for it. You heard it here first. Blood Sun versus Merfolk versus Vampire. New Modern meta. Anyway, Richard, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out. It's always fun to talk about the new cards.
Yep, my pleasure, Seth.
And thank you to all of you for watching. So if you haven't seen it yet, we also have top 10 Commander cards with Tomer. Top 10 Standard will be coming out shortly, so keep an eye out for those. Anyway, thanks again for watching, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.